My guest today is Lynne Balzer.
Okay, biofuels are not sustainable. There's nothing new about biofuels or fuels derived from plants such as trees and corn. They've been used since the dawn of history when people started burning them for cooking and heating their homes. There are different types of biofuels: wood, crops that are being used for corn that's being used for ethanol and biodiesel, vegetable oils and animal fats for biodiesel. And then there's trash and garbage that's just burned directly for energy. And also sewage and animal manure can be used to produce methane, which is a fuel. After oil was discovered, biofuels lost their popularity. With huge supplies of crude oil in Texas and Oklahoma in the beginning of the 20th century, petroleum became a less expensive alternative to biofuels. They have fostered tremendous prosperity and technological development. Our civilization runs on affordable energy from petroleum, natural gas, and coal. But then, the United Nations Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, IPCC, founded in 1988, claimed that the release of carbon dioxide from the combustion of coal, natural gas, and petroleum was causing Earth's temperature to rise. In 2015, the United Nations launched Agenda 2030 for Sustainable Development. They listed 17, quote, sustainable development goals for Earth's future that they want in place by 2030. Sustainable means able to function and develop without hurting the environment or depleting the natural resources needed for the future. And goal number 7, affordable and clean energy. They want to replace petroleum, natural gas, and coal with energy produced by renewables. And that would be solar power, wind power, and biofuels. The UN describes affordable and clean energy as the provision of energy services that are accessible, affordable, reliable, and environmentally sustainable for all the world's people, while reducing reliance on fossil fuels and transitioning to renewable energy alternatives. But are biofuels really sustainable, affordable, reliable, and clean? One type of biofuel, ethanol or ethyl alcohol, made from either corn or cane sugar. Ethanol is mixed with gasoline in a 10% or 15% blend. Ethanol is the same kind of alcohol as that found in alcoholic beverages. In the 1970s, the OPEC nations, on a whim, cut their oil exports to raise the price of oil, creating fuel shortages and a false energy crisis. This OPEC oil embargo in the early 1970s led to high prices for gasoline and oil and long lines at the gas pumps. And us old fogies remember when that happened. You were only allowed to buy gasoline every other day. Some schedules were even dates and some were odd dates. If your schedule was Monday, Wednesday, and Friday, and you ran out of gas on a Tuesday, you'd be out of work. You'd be out of luck, sorry. In the United States, a group of Democrats, led by Representative Henry Waxman, made a deal with the corn lobby, or agribusiness. In exchange for its support of their political campaigns, they engineered a mandate to blend corn-derived ethanol with gasoline as an amendment to the 1990 Clean Air Act. Former Vice President Al Gore recalls with pride the fact that as head of the Senate, he cast a tie-breaking vote in the Senate on August 4th, 1994, mandating the use of ethanol in gasoline. But it turns out that they were completely wrong. Petroleum is not in short supply. There are now about 65,000 known oil fields, many of which are gigantic. Over 900 of these oil fields contain at least 500 million barrels each. And since petroleum was discovered, only about 7% of the world's known reserves have been used. Vast deposits of natural gas have also been found. There are an estimated 14 trillion barrels of oil in known reserves. Only about 1 trillion barrels have been used since the discovery of petroleum. Michael J. Economides, one of the world's foremost experts on the geopolitics of energy, stated, quote, approximately 6 to 8 trillion barrels of oil from conventional resources, with the same or more from unconventional resources, are believed to be in place and as yet untapped. This gives us a total of 12 to 16 trillion barrels in place. The government policymakers must be aware by now that there is no shortage of petroleum and natural gas. But this knowledge didn't stop them from continuing to mandate the use of ethanol in gasoline. This fact has been completely hidden from the public. The people running things don't want us to know that biofuels are not needed for energy security as they claim. An article published in Science Direct in November of 2022 stated that biofuels have great potential in ensuring energy security. Obviously, the author was unaware of just how many petroleum reserves we have. Ethanol is a huge business. About 45% of all the corn grown in the United States goes into the production of ethanol, and that's up from 25% in 2007. So about 40 million of the 90 million acres of cornfields in the United States are diverted to ethanol production. In 2021, 15 billion gallons of ethanol were produced in the United States alone. Government subsidies for the corn industry include tax breaks, grants, loans, and loan guarantees. And these subsidies average $1.65 per gallon, coming right out of your taxes. The Renewable Fuel Standard, RFS, established by Congress, mandated that each year 25 billion gallons of biofuel be mixed into traditional fuel sources. To produce ethanol, millions of acres of virgin prairie and wetlands have been plowed up for the first time ever. That's in addition to the 5 million acres of farmland that had been set aside for conservation, more than Yellowstone, Everglades, and Yosemite parks combined. These vanished during the Obama administration. This land conversion often occurs in ecologically sensitive areas, leading to a loss of habitat that's devastating to wildlife. Over a recent 4-year period, the lucrative production of corn and soybean crops expanded on 7 million acres of grasslands in the United States. In the first comprehensive analysis of United States land use change in 2015, researchers at the University of Wisconsin-Madison discovered that between 2008 and 2012 alone, this conversion to corn and soy could have emitted as much carbon dioxide into the atmosphere as 34 coal-fired power plants operating for 1 year, or 28 million more cars on the road. The National Wildlife Fund reported that biofuel production has increased by over 200% since 2008. This has put 60% of the waterfowl population in the United States at risk, including the sage grouse. And if these people who call themselves green are permitting that, then they couldn't care much about the environment. In the tropics, 2.5 million acres of soil was lost because of the production of palm oil for biodiesel. This has helped put elephants, tigers, and orangutans on the endangered species list. One study reported that biofuel production causing deforestation produces up to 80% more greenhouse gas emissions than burning traditional fuels would. When crucial carbon sinks like forests, native grasslands, and peatlands are converted to farmland, they are no longer able to sequester carbon dioxide from the atmosphere. Rather than rotating their crops with soybeans to add nitrogen back to the soil, Many farmers just keep planting corn year after year. They must then add much more nitrogen to the soil, and this averages 140 pounds of nitrogen fertilizer per acre of land. The increased use of nitrogen fertilizers in growing these crops has caused massive runoffs of nitrates, about 30 pounds per acre, into creeks and rivers, contaminating water supplies. Cleaning up this water has become very costly, and some people even found nitrates in their drinking water. Maple Ethanol, a Belgian investment company, bought about 27,000 acres of farmland in Peru for growing sugarcane for ethanol. And this is about 2% of the going rate for farmland in northern Peru, which is $1,200 an acre. They got it for $24 an acre. Many people in that area lost access to their traditional grazing lands and saw their homes and farmyards suddenly engulfed by vast sugarcane plantations. Some people were even evicted from their homes. After the Maple Ethanol Company was sold, the new operator diverted the Chira River by building controversial dirt dams, leaving many farmers without access to water. They recklessly burned sugarcane fields, damaging the health of the local people to support Europe's drive for so-called renewable energy. And ethanol isn't even a good fuel. Marv Klowak, who's the vice president of research and development for Briggs & Stratton, they make small engines. He said ethanol has inherent properties that can cause corrosion of metal parts, including carburetors, degradation of plastic and rubber components, harder starting, and reduced engine life. The higher the ethanol content, the more acute the effects. Using gasoline with more than 10% ethanol voids most small engine warranties. If ethanol isn't burned within 60 days, it decays. This is because ethanol fuels are hygroscopic. They attract water. Because of this, fuel separation can occur and damage an engine's carburetor. Fuel that has decayed in this way contains varnish and sludge deposits. A 15% ethanol blend called E15 cannot be used in a vehicle unless its engine has been specially modified. A gallon of gasoline delivers 116,900 BTUs. That's British thermal units of energy. A gallon of ethanol delivers only 76,000 BTUs. That's about 2/3 the energy of gasoline. So a vehicle gets fewer miles per gallon of gasoline ethanol blend than it does on pure gasoline. Yet it costs about $4 to produce 1 gallon of ethanol from corn. When ethanol is burned, it releases large quantities of nitrogen oxide, or smog, into the atmosphere. Ethanol processing plants emit thousands of tons of carbon dioxide and various pollutants, and there are over 200 such plants strewn across the Midwest. In an article in the journal Science, Keith Johnson reported, quote, corn-based ethanol, instead of producing a 20% savings, nearly doubles greenhouse emissions over 30 years. This is because biofuel markets encourage farmers to level forests and convert wilderness areas into farmland, which would otherwise serve as carbon dioxide sinks. Even though a gallon of ethanol costs more to produce than a gallon of gasoline, we are charged more for pure gasoline than the gasoline-ethanol blend, encouraging us to purchase the blend. But your vehicle gets more miles per gallon of pure gasoline. It takes 131,000 BTUs of energy to produce just 1 gallon of ethanol. Professor David Pimentel of Cornell University stated, quote, about 70% more energy is required to produce ethanol than the energy that ethanol contains. Every time you make 1 gallon of ethanol, there is a net energy loss of 54,000 BTUs. Professor Pimentel also reported, quote, "The use of corn for ethanol has led to major increases in the price of U.S. beef, chicken, pork, eggs, bread, cereals, and milk, a boon to agribusiness and a bane to consumers." Ethanol is now a worldwide phenomenon with mandates in over 60 countries. With serious food shortages anticipated in the near future, starvation is on the horizon for as many as 1 billion people. Growing crops for fuel dramatically raises food prices and thus has become a moral issue. Although the UN has been pushing renewable energy, including biofuels, by its own admission, its website says, quote, "More than 600 million people worldwide are projected to face hunger in 2030. The UN website continues, "High food prices continue to plague many nations. Malnutrition persists worldwide, jeopardizing children's well-being and future development. How will biofuels mandates help with this?" And Benjamin Sinauer from Foreign Affairs said, quote, "The enormous volume of corn required by the U.S. ethanol industry is sending shock waves through the food system. By putting pressure on global supplies of edible crops, the surge in ethanol production will translate into higher prices for both processed and staple foods around the world." And Lester Brown, director of the Earth Policy Institute, said, "We are witnessing the beginning of one of the great tragedies of history. The United States, in a misguided effort to reduce its oil insecurity by converting grain into fuel for cars, is generating global food insecurity on a scale never seen before." Using corn as a fuel seems to be the easy path to renewable energy. However, this research shows that the environmental costs are much greater and the benefits fewer than using corn for food. And that was Richard Uretich from Critical Zone Observatories. "We thought and hoped that it would be a climate solution and reduce and replace our reliance on gasoline," commented Dr. Tyler Lark, a researcher with the Nelson Institute for Environmental Studies. Well, that must have been named after you, Tom. At the University of Wisconsin-Madison. It turns out to be no better for the climate than the gasoline it aims to replace, and comes with all kinds of other impacts. And Dr. Lark also said, ethanol puts 24% more carbon dioxide into the atmosphere as gasoline per unit of energy. And just as ethanol is blended with gasoline, biodiesel fuel is a blend of 80% petroleum diesel and 20% biodiesel. Biodiesel is made from soybean or another oil treated with methanol and a catalyst. This huge industry also receives substantial government subsidies through the Biomass Crop Assistance Program, BCAP. Producers are reimbursed up to 50% of their cost, and these companies wouldn't even exist without the subsidies. They would go out of business. In the U.S. alone, 86.3 million acres of soybeans will be used to produce 14 billion pounds of soybean oil for biodiesel in 2025. Oils used for biodiesel could be soybean oil, palm oil, sunflower oil, peanut oil, olive oil, and canola. But 73% of the biodiesel that's burned in the United States comes from soybean oil. Biodiesel costs $1.80 per gallon more than regular diesel. So it too is subsidized by politicians, costing U.S. taxpayers $5.4 billion each year. There's a tax incentive of $1 per gallon for using biodiesel. On April 14, 2008, the online African Energy News Review news service reported that food riots had killed 5 people in Haiti. Quote, the diversion of food crops to biofuel production was a significant factor contributing to global food price rocketing by 83% in the last year and causing violent conflicts in Haiti and other parts of the world. The UN's Food and Agriculture Organization, FAO, reported a 45% increase in the World Food Price Index in just 1 year during the 2008 food crisis. But then, believe it or not, human-caused climate change was blamed for these rising food prices. These price hikes affected all major biofuel feedstocks, including sugarcane, corn, rapeseed oil, palm oil, and soybeans. The head of FAO, Jacques Diouf, cautioned that there was a very serious risk that fewer people will be able to get food, particularly in the developing world. This policy directly conflicts with United Nations Sustainable Goal Number 2, which is end hunger, achieve food security, and improve nutrition, and promote sustainable agriculture. Isn't that ironic? And here are the 17 development goals. And right up here it says no poverty, zero hunger. So this is upside down policy making. In Tanzania, Brain reported in a paper entitled An African Call for a Moratorium on Agri-Fuel Developments, November 2007, that thousands of farmers growing rice and maize were evicted from their homes and lands to enable large companies to plant sugarcane and jatropha trees, the seeds of which are used as a feedstock. A feedstock is any material that's used in the manufacture of a product. But the push for biofuel feedstocks is pressuring the food supply market that has been already overwhelmed by surging demand. This unfortunate practice also affects other crops, like wheat and rice, since many farmers will plant feedstock crops rather than food if it is more profitable. Forbes reported that possibly 33 nations face social unrest due to the soaring prices of food and energy. China also has an active biofuels program. They are importing the root vegetable cassava, grown in Malaysia, the Philippines, Indonesia, and Nigeria for use as a feedstock. Even though this is causing price increases in the countries where it's grown, the grain website reported that China said its motive was to relieve tensions with food supplies. And Simon Johnson, director of research at the University of Minnesota, said, a substantial inflationary shock in the form of higher food prices during the previous 12 months was driven in large part by biofuels policy in industrial countries. There's a direct link between corn and soybean prices and the cost of other food. Higher corn prices lead to the higher cost of animal feed. Of course, this translates into higher prices for meat, eggs, and dairy products. Maybe this is why our food prices have been skyrocketing. Websites promoting renewable energy will tell you that the use of biofuels for energy isn't raising the price of food. But that is illogical and a lie. Don't believe it. This graph shows what I'm talking about here. The price of corn just between 2001 and 2009, that was an 8-year period, it went from under $2 a bushel to over $4 a bushel. So that was double. And then this shows you how the ethanol production was going up during that time. It went up from just under 2 million gallons all the way up to almost 12 million gallons. Billion gallons. So that would be 12,000 million. That would be billion, right? Food price hikes affect the poor the most. These people already spend much of their income on food, said Lester Brown of the Earth Policy Institute. I think a lot of those on the lower rungs of the global economic ladder and barely hanging on will simply lose their grip, he says. The question is how many, but no one knows the answer to that. According to Joachim von Braun of the International Food Policy Research Institute, a large biofuel expansion would reduce calorie consumption by more than 8% in Latin America and sub-Saharan Africa. This is a devastating reduction for someone who's already hungry. So basically, there's competition between gas tanks and people's mouths. On February 21st, 2025, the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency, EPA, announced that it would uphold an April 28th implementation date for a request from 8 Midwest governors to allow year-round sales of gasoline containing 15% E15 ethanol. And those states were Ohio, Illinois, Iowa, Minnesota, Missouri, Nebraska, South Carolina, and Wisconsin. They asked for this authority, and they were joined in their support by the American Petroleum Institute and farm groups. A bipartisan group of U.S. senators reintroduced a bill allowing for nationwide sales of E15. Meanwhile, other oil groups, such as the American Fuel and Petrochemical Manufacturers and the Fueling American Jobs Coalition, spoke out against the EPA's decision. The Renewable Food Standard Program, RFS, mandates that increasing volumes of biofuels be blended into the nation's transportation fuel supply. It started at 4 billion gallons in 2005, rising to over 7 billion by 2012, and was increased to 36 billion gallons by 2022. The Fueling American Jobs Coalition is a coalition of union workers and independent American oil refiners fighting for a common sense fix to the EPA's flawed renewable fuel standard. This organization stated in January of this year, 2025, quote, "At the helm of EPA, Administrator Zeldin has a great opportunity to reform the renewable fuel standard. The outdated and broken ethanol mandate that has devastated our nation's domestic refining capacity." So it'll be interesting to see what Lee Zeldin does about that. There are acceptable ways of using biofuels for energy. These could be the combustion of biogenic materials in municipal solid waste, paper products, cotton and wool products, and food yard and wood wastes. Converting animal manure and human sewage to biogas, which is mostly methane, or the chemical conversion of plastics to liquid fuels. And there is a large program in India that's working on that. This would certainly help to convert unwanted trash into energy sources. Direct combustion is the most commonly used method for converting trash into useful energy. Waste can be burned directly for heating buildings and water, for providing industrial process heat, and even for generating electricity in steam turbines. This process is called waste to energy, essentially turning trash into usable energy. Biogas, also called biomethane or natural gas, is produced in anaerobic digesters, at sewage treatment plants, and at dairy and livestock operations. Biogas also forms in and can be captured from solid waste landfills. Gasification uses a variety of carbonaceous materials as feedstock, including coal, petroleum, and waste, to produce syngas. Syngas, or synthesis gas, is a mixture of hydrogen and carbon monoxide in various ratios. It often contains some carbon dioxide and methane. It is combustible and can be used as a fuel. Another name for syngas is wood gas. Syngas has been used as a replacement for gasoline when gasoline supply has been limited. So those are all good uses of biofuels. Syngas is also used to produce methanol, diesel, hydrogen, and industrial chemicals such as ammonia. Another biofuel is wood, which has been burned for energy since the dawn of civilization. The BBC learned that Drax, a British power company that has received £6 billion in United Kingdom green subsidies, has been burning wood from some of the world's most precious forests. They have documented evidence that a virgin forest in British Columbia in Canada was clear-cut and converted into wood pellets that were then shipped over 5,000 miles to fuel this electrical power plant. Just transporting all this wood such a long distance requires a great deal of, quote, fossil fuel. And this is the Drax power plant in North Yorkshire in England, and that provides about 5% of Britain's energy. And this is the remains of a virgin forest in Canada that was cut down to provide electricity in Great Britain. Britain has a plentiful supply of coal. The coal once used in the Drax plant, which was converted to wood burning, didn't have to be shipped over 5,000 miles. There was a friend of ours who lives in England told us about a documentary that they had on TV a few months ago. The spokesman for the company running the plant claimed that the wood chips are all waste wood, which is unfit for other purposes. To check this out, a TV film crew followed the transport being used to get the wood back to where they picked it up. This proved to be perfectly good timber. When confronted with this information, the company's spokesman refused to accept even the video evidence. The energy required to clear-cut the forest, convert the wood into pellets, and then transport the huge quantity of wood needed to run this immense facility thousands of miles has obviously never been considered. Yet this practice has been hailed as a great achievement by people who think they are green. Under European Union rules, wood imported from outside the EU is considered to be a renewable zero-carbon fuel source. Going along with that, in 2018 and 2022, U.S. Congress declared nearly all forest biomass in the United States to be carbon-free. But declaring a substance carbon-free doesn't make it carbon-free. In 2023, the United States exported about 8.6 million tons of wood fuel pellets. When wood is burned, carbon dioxide is emitted, just as it is with gasoline and coal. However, biofuel advocates claim that the combustion of these plants is carbon neutral because the trees absorbed carbon dioxide while they were growing. But it takes 40 to 70 years to regrow a forest. Scientists point out that trees don't sequester substantial amounts of carbon until they're at least 30 years old. The UN policy that considers burning wood for electricity to be carbon neutral encouraged the United States forest industry to produce wood pellets for power plants in Britain, Europe, South Korea, and other nations. Scientists have warned that the failure to consider the emissions produced by burning trees could help destabilize the global climate. And that would just be the opposite of what they think they're doing. A letter to the United States Congress from a group of environmental scientists concluded, "We are hopeful that a new and more scientifically sound direction will be considered by members of Congress that emphasizes forest protections and a shift away from consumption of wood products and forest biomass energy to help mitigate the climate crisis." And burning wood releases 1.5 times as much carbon dioxide as coal and 3 times as much carbon dioxide as natural gas for the same amount of energy. This is because of wood's carbon bonds, water content, and lower temperatures at which it burns. Even worse, when these trees are cut down, the soil microbes underneath the cut trees release just as much carbon dioxide into the atmosphere as does the combustion of the trees themselves. So when trees are cut down and burned, 3 times as much carbon dioxide is released as from coal for the same amount of energy produced. Clear-cut forests are replanted with just 1 or 2 species of trees, reducing biodiversity from 10 to 20 species to just 1 or 2 species of trees. Devastating to the environment, this practice disrupts nature's balance. Forests owned by the state of Massachusetts, quote, are being logged at drastic, nearly clear-cut levels and at unsustainable rates. Biomass is an appealing easy out for wasteful energy policies and land barons hungry for quick cash. This sweetheart deal for big landowners is being sold as carbon neutral. In the green bureaucrats' flawed energy accounting system, the practice of burning wood is considered superior to the combustion of coal that could have been mined right in the United Kingdom. The horrendous practice of burning wood to produce electricity is now using as much wood as all of the other uses of wood worldwide. That's hard to believe. Building construction, furniture, paper, etc. But it meets just a tiny fraction, about 5%, of Europe's energy requirements. And that's the remains of a clear-cut forest there. The Renewable Energy Directive, which is RED, has stated a goal of doubling that 5% figure. How could such programs ever be construed as sustainable or environmentally wise? In setting the goal of doubling Europe's 2015 renewable energy levels by 2030, the European Union decreed that cutting down forests to be burned in electric power plants qualifies as, quote, zero carbon renewable energy. They did this after nearly 800 scientists warned them that this policy would actually increase carbon dioxide emissions. After the forest is cut down, these trees will no longer be there to absorb the carbon dioxide they took in from the atmosphere when they were alive. At the COP23 Global Climate Conference in 2017, countries with tropical rainforests, including Indonesia and Brazil, jointly stated their goals, quote, to increase the use of wood to generate energy as part of efforts to limit climate change. A 2018 article in Nature Communications stated, if the world met just an additional 2% of global primary energy with wood, it would need to double its industrial wood harvests. But here's the worst part of the problem. It has never been proven that carbon dioxide is Earth's temperature control knob. Carbon dioxide is a trace gas occupying only 0.04% of the atmosphere. The strongest greenhouse gas is water vapor. We never hear about that. And this chart shows exactly what's happening with the various greenhouse gases. This is the total amount of absorption and scattering here, and this is what water vapor's contribution is. And here's carbon dioxide's contribution, which is much, much less than water vapor, right? And methane is even less. That's just a tiny amount. And the term greenhouse effect is very misleading. A greenhouse is a closed system having walls and a roof. But our Earth is not a closed system. Thus, the atmosphere does not function like a greenhouse. But whether or not carbon dioxide has affected the temperature, there still is no justification for growing crops for fuel. Many of us have known for a long time that the huge biofuel industry, part of the climate change agenda, is not about climate change at all. It's really part of a plan to impose total economic and political control of the people. Climate change is an elite scare tactic to get you to fall into line, and most people do. This is like the COVID pandemic. Now, 5 years after the COVID pandemic started, the truth is coming out. Most of what world governments said about it was false. Yet, people obediently followed orders from frauds like Dr. Deborah Birx, the former White House coronavirus response coordinator, and Anthony Fauci, who funded the biolab in Wuhan, China. Dr. Birx is now finally admitting the truth. Some of us who spoke out about school closures and masks or refused to take the so-called vaccine were severely punished and censored. The problem is that everyone, not just a few, should have been speaking out. Those who were pushing the climate change agenda noticed how easily fear can prompt obedience, even when there's absolutely no scientific support for their claims. They've used those very same techniques in the climate change scam. For the last 40 years, they've claimed that if we didn't stop emitting carbon dioxide and methane, within 10 years, the ice caps would melt, drowning islands and seaside towns, and planet Earth would be inundated by hurricanes and floods. They don't care that none of their predictions came true because they know that fear works. So here's a summary of my presentation. Number one, for each unit of energy produced, the combustion of biofuels releases more carbon dioxide into the atmosphere than the combustion of petroleum and natural gas. Since there is no shortage of petroleum and natural gas, there's no justification for burning biofuels. Converting virgin prairie and wetlands and tropical rainforests into agricultural land for biofuels is extremely destructive to the environment. And number four, it takes 129,200 BTUs of energy to produce 1 gallon of ethanol, which releases only 76,000 BTUs of energy when burned. How could this ever be considered sustainable? Biofuel industries survive only because of the huge government subsidies paid for by our taxes. Unsustainable. Number six, growing crops to produce fuel instead of food raises food prices, hurting the poor the most. It threatens a significant number of the world's people with starvation or malnutrition. Burning biofuels for energy is not clean. It is destructive to the environment. How in the world can they call it clean energy? Now, here's the big question, though. What can we do about this evil? Well, number one, you can find gasoline stations in your area that sell pure gasoline and patronize them. Your car will get better gas mileage and your engine will last longer. There's a state-by-state list of ethanol-free stations on the website puregas.org. If you suspect that there's water in your gas tank, you can buy an additive called heat gasline antifreeze. If you have a diesel engine, there's a product called Stable Food Stabilizer. I'm not affiliated with any of those companies, and I'm sure there are other products too that work for that. Number two is we can educate people. Tell them about this problem. You can give them a 3-page article, which we have on the subject. Here's why using biofuels for energy is unsustainable and immoral and must stop now. Number three, contact the new head of the EPA, Lee Zeldin, and tell him why biofuels are unsustainable and don't make sense. And he's part of the Trump administration, so hopefully he's going to listen. Okay, there's his phone number and there's his email address. And number four, you can call and write to your senators or your congressman. And you can find their contact information online. If you have any ideas for other actions we can take, let us know in the comments section. Thanks for watching this presentation. And if you would like additional information about climate change scam, you can read my book, which is Exposing the Great Climate Change Lie, available on Amazon in paperback or Kindle formats. So that's the end of my presentation.
Okay, thanks a ton. I just love your style that it's soft-spoken, but so much data and so much sanity. So thank you for all that. Very nice.
Well, thank you for having me. Really appreciate being here.
So what do you think? Do you have any thoughts on the Trump administration? Just off the top of your head, are they going to be able to push back against this the biofuels scam in real ways? Or I guess the public needs
Well,
to
I know,
help force them. Yeah.
right. I know that Donald Trump doesn't believe in any of this, and he's saying drill, baby, drill. So that will give us a lot more resources than we already have. And I'm really not sure where Lee Zeldin stands on this, so we're going to have to find out. I didn't like that he had approved that increase to 15% ethanol.
Oh, he approved of that.
Yes,
Oh, yeah, not a good sign.
unfortunately.
Do you think there's anything about this global vibe shift around the world where people are realizing that woke energy doesn't make any sense, and shipping, like you said, shipping wood 5,000 miles is not going to prevent bad weather?
Yes, I think that especially in Britain, I think there are many people that are waking up over there, and there's a lot of discussion about that. So that's really good to know that. And also, I think the people in Germany have found out, what happens when you try to use these so-called renewable resources, and they had to deindustrialize. So I believe that there's a move in Germany now to go back in the other direction. And many of the parties, that they may not be in power right now, but they represent most of the people. They're really waking up.
So just a couple of slides ago, you mentioned a 3-page article. Can you send me a link to that article?
I certainly will, yes.
Yeah.
In fact, I'll send that to you as a
Yeah.
PDF and also a link from our website.
Okay, yeah, I'll put that in the show description. All right. Anything else you want to say before we finish this up here?
I just can't understand how this all got started. And it's very, very sad in my mind. And I'm really, really concerned about what's happening with our foods shortages that are happening, just like how they destroyed so many chickens to make the price of eggs go up. And they're definitely trying to get people not to eat meat anymore because they're saying that produces methane, which is really a joke. So hopefully people are going to start understanding that.
Based on what you've seen, do you think that these people are motivated by trying to do the right thing and make our lives better? Or is it a lot more about seizing land and things like that?
That's really a good question. I really don't know the answer.
All right. Okay, on that note, we'll finish up. But thank you very much. I hope you have a time to do another presentation because I love them. You're doing great.
Well, thank you very much, Tom. Thanks for having me. Appreciate it.
All right. Talk to you next time. Lynne Balzer. Bye.